Welcome to this webinar where we'll be focusing on the changes to the A2 Key and B1 preliminary exams, which go live in January 2020, and sharing some ideas and strategies you can use in the classroom. I'm Anthi, I'm a Senior Assessment Manager at Cambridge Assessment English, and I'm responsible for a variety of exams and projects, and I'm joined by my colleague, Joanna, who is an Assessment Manager working on the preliminary exams.
Hello, thanks for joining us today. Let's start by looking at the aims of this webinar. We'll look at why we've changed the A2 Key and B1 preliminary exams and give you a brief summary of what has changed. As we go through the changes that have been made, we'll share with you some exam strategies and practical ideas for activities that you can use in the classroom to prepare your students for their exams. And there will also be some time for questions at the end. So let's look at why we're changing the exams, Anthi.
Cambridge qualifications are regularly revised to ensure that they are fit for purpose and stay relevant for the needs of learners and teachers. With each revision, we ensure that evolving approaches to assessment and learning are incorporated, and feedback from people like teachers, students, test centre managers and education policymakers is addressed. In this instance, we wanted to align A2 Key and B1 preliminary more closely to the higher level exams to make the progression from one level to the next clearer and more coherent, with more repetition of the same task types across different exams. And you see this as we go through the changes. It's important to note that not all of the tasks in the A2 Key and B1 preliminary exams have been revised. Feedback and validity analysis have shown that a number of the current tasks work very well, whilst there were recommendations to replace or change other tasks to ensure they remain relevant.
We'll start looking at the A2 Key and B1 preliminary reading and writing papers first. Please bear in mind that the changes apply to both the For Schools and Non-For Schools exams, as well as both the paper-based and the computer-based versions of these exams. When we were revising the A2 Key reading and writing paper, our main aim was to make sure there was full coverage of all of the different reading and writing skills and sub-skills at A2 level, while also reducing repetition or redundancy. As a result, the revised paper is now 10 minutes shorter and has 7 parts and 32 questions, compared with 9 parts and 56 questions in the current exam. Only 3 parts of the reading and writing exam have been changed, and these are the parts that we'll be focusing on today for this paper. Part 1 has been revised to make it more similar to the task focus of B1 Preliminary Part 1. We'll look at this in more detail shortly. Part 4 in the revised exam combines current Parts 2 and 5 and is a multiple choice closed text with a lexicogrammatical focus. Finally, there is a new Part 7. Here, students are asked to write a story based on 3 pictures. This gives candidates the chance to show evidence of higher level writing skills and to facilitate upward certification. And just to clarify what we mean by upward certification, this is the possibility for candidates taking, for example, the A2 Key exam to get a certificate recognising performance at the CEFR level above, B1, where they have demonstrated this. Let's look at the changes to the B1 preliminary reading and writing exams now. One of the most noticeable changes is that the reading and writing papers have been separated. This is because it's currently a very long paper. The reading paper now has 6 parts and takes 45 minutes. 5 of those 6 parts overlap with A2 Key, and 5 of the 6 parts also overlap with B2 First, bringing better alignment across the exams. Part 4 is a new gapped text task. Sentences have been removed from the text and candidates have to decide which sentence goes in which gap. This assesses reading for gist and understanding text structure, so coherence and cohesion. We'll look at an example later. Part 6 is a new open-close task. Candidates read for detailed understanding at word and sentence level, filling in 6 gaps in a text. This predominantly focuses on grammar and aligns B1 preliminary with all of our other exams. We'll look at the revised writing tasks a bit later on. But first, let's look at some of the new reading tasks.
So, as mentioned, the new A2 Key Reading and Writing Part 1 is now much more similar to Part 1 in B1 Preliminary. The testing focus is the same as in the current test, so it's still about understanding the main message in a short notice or text. But each notice or text is accompanied by a 3-option multiple-choice question. Instead of matching notices to sentences, candidates now have to choose the correct answer, A, B or C, for each notice. For this task, students need to be familiar with a range of text types and their conventions: notices, emails, messages, signs, instructions, postcards, etc. As we said before, the focus of the task is to understand the main message of the text and choose one of the 3 available options, the one that matches the main message more closely or answers the question. A good way of tackling this task is to read the text carefully first, trying to understand what it is about. Who is writing to whom? Is it a transactional message? Or where it may appear? Then, if there is a question, like in this first example, answer it without looking at the options. In this way, the students won't be too distracted by the wrong options. As a final step, read through the 3 options and try to find the one that matches the main message more closely or that answers the question.
The new Part 4 is a combination of Parts 2 and 5 in the current exam, both of which are multiple-choice gap-fill tasks. The current Part 2 is sentence-based and has a lexical focus, while current Part 5 requires candidates to complete gaps within a continuous piece of text and has a grammatical focus. In the revised paper, this new Part 4 has a lexicogrammatical focus, so it combines the focuses of the 2 current parts. It's text rather than sentence level based, and again, like the new Part 1, it's been designed to be more similar to one of the parts in the B1 preliminary reading exam. One way of approaching this task is to read through the whole text first to get a general understanding. Then focus on the gaps, making sure you read what is written both before and after the gaps. Don't forget to read what comes after the gap, as this could be essential in helping you understand which option is correct. Then go through the options one by one, choosing the one that best fits. Think about grammar, collocation, and differences in meaning of the options provided. As there is always only one correct answer, it's a good idea to think about the reasons why the other 2 options are not plausible. And then a final reading of the text with the gaps completed is recommended to check your choices make sense.
The new B1 Preliminary Part 4 task is similar to the one in the B2 first exam. Trialling showed it would also work well at B1 level. There are 5 gaps and candidates have to choose which sentence goes in which gap. There are 3 sentences which are extra and the candidates do not have to use. To fill in the gaps, candidates have to understand the gist of the text and the text structure. So we advise they read the whole text first to understand what it is about. Then they should read around gap 1. First, paying attention to things like if there are 2 events or actions, which one happens first and which one happens next? Is there a cause and effect or other type of relationship between 2 events or actions? Are there words that refer to something that is mentioned before or after the reference word? After reading carefully before and after the gap, candidates should read all sentences A to H and decide which one best fits the gap. If they cannot decide between two sentences, it's a good idea to make a note of which ones these are, and continue the task before making a final decision after having worked through all of the gaps. The candidates should do this for all 5 gaps and should finally reread the text with the gaps filled with their chosen sentences in order to make sure that it makes sense and the narrative or argument is coherent. As we mentioned, one of the things that help understanding text structure is referencing. A popular activity on referencing in preparation for this task is to take good examples of students' written work, with their permission of course, or texts from learning materials, and rewrite parts of them so they contain no reference words. For example, in the second sentence of this sample task, where it says it is a bicycle race, you can replace it with the Tour de France. In this example, we have also replaced which with the Tour de France. Then you can have students work in groups and ask them to try to eliminate the repetition in the text as much as possible. This will give students an idea of what a text without referencing words looks like, and they can think about identifying where these can be placed in a text, as well as what they refer to, developing both reading and writing skills at the same time. Part 6 in the new B1 preliminary exam is an open-close task. This brings B1 preliminary in line with A2 key and B2 first. Paying attention to what comes before and after a gap is also useful for this task. Students have to decide which word to put in the gap, and there are no multiple choice options. So, what kind of things might be tested? For example, what word should go in gap 27? Most is the answer, so gap 27 is testing superlatives. What else is being tested here? Check which words go in each gap and then look at what type of language is being tested. Can you send us your answers in the chat box?
Okay, so just to remind you, have a look at the gaps in that text and see what kinds of words you can put in those gaps and the answers. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so somebody's answered number 27 is most.
We've got prepositions, we've got articles coming in.
Yeah, auxiliaries.
Most, if for 28, correct.
Adjectives. Okay, quite a few correct answers. Oops, going the wrong way.
Okay.
Functions, conjunctions, somebody
Okay.
says. All right.
Yeah, good. So we've got a few, as you said. Note, please, that this task doesn't just have a grammatical focus. It could also test the lexical elements, such as phrasal verbs or fixed phrases. The B1 Preliminary Handbook for Teachers has a list of structures tested at this level, but it is a good idea to have students read the whole text before they start doing this task to get an idea of what it is about, as well as afterwards to ensure the text makes sense. They should also think about what would fit in the gap to make the sentence both meaningful and accurate.
Let's move on to the changes to the A2 key listening paper now. The length remains the same, 30 minutes, but there have been some changes to the order in which the tasks appear. We've made it so that the less complex tasks come first. Plus, we've made some changes to one of the tasks, and we've introduced one new task. The rubrics have also been shortened. The new part 2 is the same as the current part 5. Parts 4 and 5 in the current test are both gap-fill tasks. In the new exam, one has been removed to eliminate redundancy. The new part 3 is a multiple choice task based on a longer listening text, just as in the current test. However, while in the current test, answers consistently come from the person answering questions, the answers in the 2020 exam may come from either speaker. In the current exam, the test focus is on information giving. In the 2020 exam, we're also testing understanding of feelings, opinions, and attitudes of the speakers. Part 4 is a new multiple choice task based on 5 short monologues or dialogues, which contain neutral or less formal language. And, as well as understanding the main idea or gist of the topic, it may also focus on the understanding of attitudes and opinions and agreement. The aim of this shift in testing focus being to help us cover more aspects of listening ability. Again, this was one of the key aims of the 2020 revision. We'll look at an example of the task in just a moment. The new Part 5 is the same as Part 2 in the current paper, so these two parts have just swapped places. Essentially, research revealed that Part 2 was less complex than Part 5 and should therefore come earlier on in the test. And what about the B1 preliminary listening paper? The length remains the same, approximately 35 minutes, but there have been some changes to the order in which the tasks appear, so that the tasks get gradually more complex. We've also introduced one new task, and like the A2 key exam, the rubrics have been shortened. Part 2 is a new task. Candidates listen to 6 short, unrelated dialogues and choose the right answer, A, B or C. We'll look at an example on the next slide. The new Part 4 is the same as the current Part 2. Candidates listen to a longer text for detailed understanding and answer the multiple choice questions. Here we can see examples of the new multiple choice tasks that appear in A2 key and B1 preliminary. So we have a question for you now. How would you get your students to approach this type of task? Can you type your answers in the chat box? So my question is, how would you get your students to approach this type of task? If you can type your answers in the chat box, then we can have a look. Okay, I don't know if I'm going up or down. Somebody says underlining keywords in the questions, reading the question, it's very important, giving your students lots of practice, very important, paying attention to keywords.
Read the rubrics.
Yeah, important. Somebody says by process of elimination. A lot of people are saying underline keywords. Offering real life listening in the classroom.
Find opposites somewhere.
Being careful about tenses and meaning.
Don't look at the options.
Okay, so we'd suggest that students read through the questions and options for each question first, as many of you said. Candidates are given the time to do this in the exam, and this will help activate their schemata and get them thinking about the topic of the monologue or dialogue. Then they could highlight or underline the key words, as a lot of you said. The people talking in these conversations are likely to use synonyms of these key words. So this is something your students need to be aware of. Encouraging your students to think about synonyms in your lessons will help them in the exam too. Students also need to be aware of the distracting information.
Now let's move on to the new writing tasks in A2 key and B1 preliminary. The new A2 key part 7 is a writing task which asks students to write about 35 words telling the story shown in the 3 pictures, and it has been designed to enable stronger candidates to demonstrate a wider range of writing skills than is currently possible, allowing for upward certification but within the parameters of the story pictures, so as to provide scaffolding. The CEFR can-do descriptors for writing at A2 level, which you can see here above the task, indicate an ability to produce a narrative text. So these tasks gives candidates the opportunity to show us an ability to do just that. It's similar to the story writing task in A2 flyers, but aimed at older students. A good strategy to tackle this task is to focus on the pictures first and try to understand what the story is without writing anything. Perhaps the students can write a few keywords that come to mind when they see the pictures. After they spend a couple of minutes thinking about the story, they should aim to tell the story as depicted in each picture, trying to link their sentences so the story is coherent. Remember that there is only a minimum of 35 words, but this does not mean that the students are expected to write a lot more than that. The more words students write, the more likely they are to make mistakes. They should focus on content rather than quantity. An idea to practice writing stories is to take an example of 4 different types of word: a noun, a verb, an adverb and an adjective from the word list for the exam you're preparing for. The words should relate to the task that you eventually want your students to write. Learners should then try to combine the 4 words into a story in 2 to 3 sentences. Then they could compare what they have written in pairs or groups. So here we have 4 groups from the A2 keyword list: drums, repair, afterwards and surprised. Can you try to write a 2 to 3 sentence story using these words as your students would write it? Can you share your sentences with us in the chat box? So just to repeat, I want you to try to use these 4 words to create a story in no more than 3 sentences and write them for us in the chat box.
So let's see. Everyone's thinking about it. They can be very short sentences. Paul was playing drums.
Yes, Paul was playing drums. So we've got a noun, a verb, an adverb and an adjective here. So let's try to make a story of them.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul was playing drums.
Aha, here's one. Oh, the man was surprised to hear the drums outside in front of his house.
Yes, so we've got surprised and drums there.
Mm-hmm. I was surprised my brother repaired my drums. Afterwards, I called...
We lost it.
Lost it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, we're asking you to think very
good.
quickly.
Yes, an example is I broke my drums, so I tried to repair them. I was surprised afterwards because they sounded better.
Mm-hmm.
This activity develops both vocabulary and writing skills. So now let's take a look at B1 preliminary writing. Writing for preliminary is now a separate paper from the reading paper and consists of 2 parts. Part 1 is compulsory and Part 2 includes 2 options candidates have to choose from. The whole paper now takes 45 minutes. Part 1 is a new email task. We will look at an example on the next slide. Part 2 is the same as the current writing Part 3, but students can now choose to write either a story or an article rather than a story or a letter. This makes the test more relevant to today's learners, broadening the range of writing skills tested, achieving greater alignment with B2 first, and ensuring there is less overlap with a new email task in Part 1. Writing output has been raised from an approximate total of 150 words to approximately 200 words. It's 100 words per task. Now, even though students will need more support and scaffolded activities to extend their writing in the classroom, it is a good opportunity for strong students to demonstrate a wider range of writing skills. Now, let's look at the new Part 1. In the current communicative message task, candidates write 35 to 45 words. In the new 2020 exams, candidates have to write an email of about 100 words. As you can see, the task is an email response to an email with prompts. When tackling this task, candidates should begin by reading the email and the prompts very carefully in order to understand the scenario and also establish who is writing to whom and about what. They should then plan an email response that addresses all the prompts and expands accordingly. When preparing students for this task, it is important to ask the following questions. What functional responses are required in the task? What conventions does the writer need to know for writing an email? What problems could the students have in writing well for a task like this?
So, common functional responses required are responding to an idea, explaining a preference, making suggestions, giving information and reasons. The conventions students need to know, common opening and closing conventions for email. And what problems could students have? Possible problems are not knowing the functional language, lack of planning or poor organisation, lack of development of responses, not giving reasons, not elaborating.
Exactly. All activities that teach students the above are useful preparation for this task. Today, we are suggesting a relay activity to help students develop their responses. You can use the sample task from the sample paper, for example, the end-of-year party task taken from B1 preliminary for schools that you can see here. After you establish the context, the fact that Mrs. Lake is a teacher who is writing to her class and is asking for ideas on the end-of-year party, and the fact that the students are writing to Mrs. Lake with their individual ideas, divide your class in at least 4 groups and ask each group to work on one of the prompts. Each group will aim to produce a sentence to respond to their allocated prompt, and each student in the group will be writing only 2 to 4 words at a time on a piece of paper. Then they will pass the paper to the next person in the group to continue the sentence. The group will stop when the sentence is about 20 words long and will then collaboratively check the sentence so everyone is happy with it. Once the whole class is finished, you can project the finished sentences to the class for feedback. To help students come up with ideas for making their sentences longer, you can have common conjunctions such as because, for example, so, written on the board. In part 2, candidates now have a choice between an article, rather than a letter, or a story. An article is suitable for listing language functions appropriate to B1. Candidates can write about feelings and opinions about a subject that's familiar to them, while stronger candidates can write something more elaborate. Please note that the term article here does not imply that this is something that could appear in the Times. We're just looking for things that could appear in something like a school magazine, for example. So don't worry unduly about the level of this question, as it's the kind of thing that appears in most course books at B1 level. When preparing your students for this exam task, it is important that they know they have to address all parts of the prompt and elaborate on their answers, as well as think about the organization of their answer as they would do with any piece of extensive writing. Describing and justifying their opinions and feelings is a good way to ensure their answers are complete. Discussing the topic in class before they start writing might help students get more ideas and organize them better.
Now we'll move on to the speaking element of the A2 Key and B1 preliminary exams. And we're going to start with a question for you. If you could change one thing about the current Key speaking exam, what would you change and why? And can you type your answer in the chat box like before? So that question again, if you could change one thing about the current Key speaking exam, what would you change and why? And the why is important. So somebody says speaking part 2. Someone else says nothing. Quite happy with the exam as it is. Someone else has said speaking part 2. Somebody else says I wouldn't change anything. They think part 1 is quite repetitive. A lot of you saying nothing. Some the length of time. Why? Why do you think the length of time needs changing? Part 2s. Someone else said they'd update the topics. Remember that at this level, there's limited topics that A2 candidates can talk about. A lot of people saying nothing. Timing is okay for others. Current part 2 is too boring and repetitive. Students can learn it by heart. Speaking part 2 is too easy.
A request for more collaborative tasks.
Yeah, more interaction. Timing's okay. Somebody says speaking part 2, it doesn't give the candidates the opportunities to express themselves more freely. So there are a mixture of answers there. Some of you think it's okay as is, others are suggesting part 2. Well, the market research we did at the beginning of the revision process suggested that there might be some room for improvement in the A2 key speaking paper, in particular part 2. So we've done our best to address this. There has been a small change to part 1, but overall test users were happy with the current format, while the part 2 in key speaking is completely new. Part 1 has the same type of questions based on the same topics and the same testing focus as before, but we've tried to create a more conversational flow by asking questions around a common theme. In part 1, phase 2, candidates are asked 2 or 3 questions in turn about one topic, and then 2 or 3 questions on a second topic. Let's have a look at an activity you could try in your classroom. First, get your students into small groups, ideally 3 in each group, and give each group 1 or 2 topics. It's important your students practice talking about familiar topics. You could use the A2 key vocabulary list for topics that students at this level should be familiar with. For example, school, hobbies, entertainment, food and drink, and sport. And then set them a time limit, say 4 to 5 minutes, to come up with a list of personal questions about that topic. You want your students to practice giving personal, factual information. Give the students a couple of examples to get them started, and ask the students to think of questions starting with different question words: what, which, where, when, and also a tell me something about question. Encourage them to write questions about present circumstances, past experiences, and future plans. The students then pass these questions to another group who have to come up with the backup questions. These are questions for candidates who don't quite understand the main question clearly. You can then pass the questions on to a third group who practice asking and answering them. Remind the students that they should express their opinions, explain, and give reasons when answering the questions, and use appropriate language to answer the questions and expand on the tell me something about prompt. The questions can then be passed around to another group so that students get practice talking about a range of different topics. Keep the questions and use them again in future lesson. Okay, as you can see, this is the new part 2 task in A2 Key Speaking. It's a collaborative task consisting of 2 phases. It assesses the student's ability to interact in a discussion, talking about likes and dislikes. In part 2, phase 1, pairs of students or groups of 3 are invited to talk together about a topic. Those pictures you saw before are intended to act as prompts for candidates to relate to their own experience of and opinions about the different activities, things, or places represented. Candidates are only expected to talk about their experiences and opinions. They're not asked to think about a situation or about the needs or opinions of someone else. as they do in B1 preliminary. In phase 2, the interlocutor extends the discussion by asking questions on the same theme to candidates in turn. This new task gives candidates a lot more freedom to talk about themselves and to say a lot more. It also better supports classroom practice by exposing candidates to a broader range of language, as well as a broader range of language functions. It places more emphasis on spoken fluency rather than accuracy, and provides for a much more meaningful, authentic and personalised interaction between candidates. So now we have a question for you. How can you help your students prepare for a task like this? Do you think you can type some of your ideas in the chat box? So how would you prepare your students for this collaborative task? Let's have a look, see what you think. So it is a new task. Am I going the wrong way again? Okay. No comments yet. Here we go. So somebody says give them some typical expressions. Give students some typical expressions they could use in an activity like this.
Role plays. Good idea.
Yeah. Brainstorming, maybe brainstorming different activities. Focusing on vocabulary. Yes. Before the exam, talk about these different topics.
Key phrases. Always good.
Yeah. Lots of similar exercises and role play. Group work, it's good. Show them more pictures. Lots of role plays.
And keywords. Real life examples. Using vocabulary to talk about holiday. Yeah, that would be useful for that task. It's good. Building their vocabulary. A lot of people are saying it's very important. Initiating and responding in conversations. Techniques,
excellent. Yes. Okay. So let's have a look at a classroom activity designed to practice for this task using the theme of holidays. So you start by brainstorming with students the different types of holidays they like to go on. For example, camping holidays, skiing holidays. Then you could elicit the types of holiday shown in these two pictures, which are skiing and sightseeing or going on city breaks, and ask students to work in pairs and come up with a minimum of 4 questions they could ask other people about these holiday activities. Give them an example to start them off and set a limit of 2 minutes. Then get group feedback and put questions on the board. Try and include the following if students haven't thought of these questions. Do you like doing X? Do you like skiing? Why? Why not? Have you ever been skiing? When was the last time you did it? Would you like to try it? How often do you do X? Or how often do you go skiing? Do you prefer skiing holidays or going on sightseeing holidays? And why? Now ask students to work in pairs and have a discussion about the topic using some of the questions elicited. Monitor the class and note down any issues to discuss after the activity. Give students the remaining pictures from this Part 2 task and ask them to continue the discussion, if possible, using questions they didn't use the first time.
The B1 preliminary speaking paper is very similar to the current exam, but there are some changes in the order of the tasks, as well as some minor changes that make it more similar to the B2 first speaking exam. Part 1 is unchanged. As you may know, in the introductory phase, there is a short conversation between the interlocutor and each candidate. From 2020, candidates are no longer asked to spell their names, as the length and complexity of names could vary a lot, and we didn't want any candidates to feel stressed due to having long surnames. Here you can see some photos for Part 2 of B1 Preliminary for Schools. One difference in the revised exam is that the pictures are not connected to the same topic anymore, and this part is now standalone. The examiner gives the candidates the topic of their picture by saying "your picture shows", and candidates can start describing the main activity in the picture and then go on to describe the people, physical appearance, clothes, the place, time of year, weather if they can tell, furniture, etc., and other things that they can see in the photograph. As you can see, the examiner also has some backup prompts, which are the same for all pictures, and they use this to give some scaffolding to weaker candidates if they are not able to describe their picture in full. The Part 3 task is almost identical to the current Part 2 task, with a graphic and situation described. As you can see, the title of the task is now printed on the candidate's material as a reminder there, and so the focus of the task is made more explicit. Also, the examiner doesn't repeat the task instructions, so candidates need to listen carefully to these. What is expected of the candidates has not changed, so your preparation for this task will probably remain unchanged as well. The topic of this sample task is a school visit to a capital city. The revised Part 4 is similar to the current Part 4, but is now thematically linked to the collaborative task in Part 3 and not to the photos as it currently is, which makes it flow more naturally as a conversation. This is a three-way discussion with the interlocutor. In this task, candidates talk about the preferences, habits and opinions in relation to the topic. In Part 4, the interlocutor widens the topic of Part 3 to avoid any overlap with what the candidates have already said. So here, the questions are more related to going on a trip and visiting places in general. A good way of preparing your students for this task is to regularly discuss opinions and preferences in class, along with justifying these. I think we've covered all of the changes to the A2 key and B1 preliminary exams now. So just to recap, here is a summary of the changes. The changes have taken place so upward certification can be enabled. We have separated the reading and the writing papers at B1 preliminary level. There is better coverage now of the listening and writing constructs in A2 key and B1 preliminary. There's more focus on fluency and interactive skills in A2 key speaking, and there's generally greater alignment across Cambridge Assessment English qualifications. As most of you already know, you can find plenty of resources on our website to support your exam preparation classes. And you'll be happy to know that there are a number of specific resources on our website to help you prepare for your students for the 2020 A2 key and B1 preliminary exams. We'll be adding new materials to the site over the coming months, so do visit it regularly. I think that's about it for the webinar today. We have some time now to answer questions. So please type your questions into the chat box and
we'll try and answer as many as we can. Let's have a look.
Okay. Are the speaking mark schemes revised? Report of...
No, the speaking mark schemes stay the same, both for key and preliminary. The mark scheme for key writing has changed, and you'll be able to find more about that on our website.
Yes. Yes.
Do candidates have to ask for each other's opinions in key part 2? I think that's a very good idea. Because it's a collaborative task, students need to show a bit more interaction. So asking their opinions, sharing opinions, it's great.
Responding to opinions also prepares them for the next level.
Yeah. What has done to lessen the level of stress of the examiner? Is that
sure what that means.
The speaking examiner? So the rubrics are still very brief for the speaking examiner in both tasks. Everything is scripted to make sure the tests are fair for everyone. So hopefully examiners are not too stressed. They can follow the rubrics. Oops.
Why did you get rid of the sentence transformation in the PET exam? Well, it was research revealed that the PET B1 preliminary transformation, sentence transformation task was too limited in scope for that level, and it was better suited for higher levels. That's why it has been kept higher up, but it was removed in B1. There were simply too few structures to test.
Yeah. Somebody's asking about B2 first exam. Has that changed too? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. Who knows in the next few years? I think B2 first was revised just a few years ago. So I don't think we'll be changing that anytime soon. Are there any videos of the speaking exams? I've just noticed that question. I'm not sure if it was for preliminary or key.
Yeah.
But yes, if you go onto the website dedicated to key and preliminary, you can see speaking videos with examiner comments. Very useful to watch with your students as well, I think, in the classroom. Oops. How do you manage time? How do you manage time during the whole process?
I'm not sure what process means here.
Yeah. Each part of the paper, there's a specific amount of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Will the students have 90 minutes for reading and writing altogether, or do they have to hand in the reading after 45 minutes? Yes, these two papers will be administered separately, so they will probably, I'm not sure in which order they will be done. I think reading will be done first, it will be collected, and then the writing paper will be handed out.
Yeah. Let's see, oops. We've
answered that. That too.
Oh, questions about IELTS. Fortunately, we don't have much news about IELTS. There might be another webinar on IELTS.
Yeah, if you follow the website and perhaps sign up to the newsletter from Cambridge Assessment English, then probably you will get all the news in your inbox.
Yeah.
So
Somebody asks, is this new exam more difficult? No.
No.
It's not supposed to be more difficult. The level of difficulty is exactly the same. There's just more scope, I would say.
There's more opportunity for students to show what they know, and especially with upward certification, they can actually get something for demonstrating more knowledge.
Yeah. Somebody's been looking for the lesson plans for the new exams. They haven't yet been added to the website. We were told they would be added by the end of the week, but there are lesson plans, there are going to be lesson plans for each part of the 2020 exams, key and preliminary exams.
Both for schools and non for schools.
Yeah. So look out for those. You'll be able to get plenty of ideas to use in your classroom. Okay. Oops. Are there any test books? I'm pretty sure that there are.
Practice test books, yes. Yes, we have created in collaboration with Cambridge Exams Publishing practice books on both the revised A2 Key and B1 Preliminary. And I will again direct you to the website, and you should be able to see whether they are already out. There should be.
Yeah, I think so. Also on the website there are examples of resources you can use, textbooks you can use with your students. Somebody else has asked, will we find material on the site to be used in class? Yes, so you've got the lesson plans, handbooks have some useful tips.
You've got the sample tests. And you also have posters to use in your classroom to develop vocabulary and use
there are
them.
Activities to use with these posters.
Exactly. So plenty of material, and with the lesson plans are coming in this week.
Yeah.
Should be enough.
In the new writing of A2, candidates should the candidates write the story in the present tense rather than in the past tense?
I think that's a choice that you need to make depending on the story. There is no expectation, there is no right answer, it's a story, and I think if the story that the students produce is a fair description of the story we're trying to tell with the pictures, then it should not have any effect on their marking.
Okay. I think we've answered that one.
Yeah. How many hours do we... Oh, I lost
Sorry.
it. It's okay.
I think that's about how many hours do we need to
Yeah.
prepare students for A2?
I think that would depend on your context, that would depend on at what level your students are starting at, and on their personal, or as a group, their preferences and their strengths and their weaknesses, and the amount of, the number of hours of instruction that you have available as well, and the resources that you have available. So that's not an easily... a question we can answer, I think, easily. It depends highly on specific group characteristics.
Definitely. Somebody's asking about the marking scheme for writing. You can have a look on the website. In the handbooks, there's information on the mark scheme.
So in the handbooks, you will find the mark schemes, but also sample responses that have been marked and comments from the examiners justifying why this answer got this mark for each criterion. So this should help you understanding how the new writing task in key and preliminary are being marked.
Somebody's asking about students who need special arrangements. So the test centre, you have to always get in touch with the test centre if your students have any requirements for special arrangements. Make sure they do this in advance of the exam.
And there is guidance again on the website. If you type in the search box special arrangements, you should be able to find all the information you need.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the webinar. Great, thanks. Okay, I think we've got through most of those questions.
I think we've answered most.
Yeah. All right, well,
Yeah, I think that's all.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope the webinar was useful. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.